just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history, what body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. On the 4th day of January 2019, Friday Java, beaming from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is Friday, and it is our first program of 2019. As we roll along here, got over 3,000, 50, 60, 70 something programs done on the Boston Red series. There's over 500, and the numbers, man, and then the numbers go on and on. In all, we have over 4,000 audio programs out there on various networks. You can enjoy them. We started here in 2008 with Barack Obama. Unfortunately, we didn't have programs coming from Iowa when we were actually in Iowa. We started, I believe, with the Pennsylvania primary. It was kind of crude then. Before we employed mixers and the lot. We were over on Blog Talk. We still are there as they phase on over to Spreaker. But we did not have as many outlets. We had RSS, of course, and there was Apple. We never really did very much at Apple, but we did have the RSS feed. We now, of course, have iHeart, and we have YouTube, and we have Stitcher, and various others in between. We are also on Alexa and the Google smart speakers. You can just say Boston Red. Our Boston Red on the World, are the Numbers Man Show. That's our macroeconomics program. And also the open source report. You can say that, and you will find us if you're on the so-called smart speakers. The University of Virginia, that is at Charlottesville, is off now. They're on a holiday, a break, which is well-deserved, and as we normally do on Friday morning, we honor Heberheier. Heberheier was killed by white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and think of any more adjectives to describe those kinds of people, but nonetheless, they were out there and they killed Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, Virginia. We do have some analytics from the Washington Post. We'll be talking about the shutdown and how long it will last. We'll also talk about it on Numbers Man, what is actually going on there. And with the Post, the consequences of the government shutdown strikes the private sector. There are many different kinds of private sector. I think we'll do this one first. In Washington, the people that clean the various departments, many of those are private people. But this one is about tech workers. Kelly Dodge is a name. Has a case of shutdown anxiety. She's a project manager for a tech firm out of the state of Colorado that produces software for the federal government, and none of her coders are getting paid. She's increasingly worried they will find jobs that are more stable elsewhere, which will happen. It's hard to find people who can do this work, Dodge said, whose team's developing a tool to help private companies comply with the Endangered Species Act, not something high on the menu of the DJ Trump administration. I have a highly motivated and exceptional team that really cares about working for the government and doing things for natural resources, but they feel disrespected. No doubt they have been disrespectful. As the government shutdown, what we call the Trump shutdown, enters its 14th day roughly, that is almost 3 weeks of government work. They work 5 days a week. Its effects are starting to cascade far beyond the balking agency buildings in D.C. Private companies with federal contracts are coding with chaos, confusion, uncertainty, while businesses large and small that rely upon the operations of the vast federal bureaucracy are starting to feel sand in their gears. The senator from Alabama, Richard Selby's been around a long time, predicted Thursday that the shutdown could last for months and months, while the broader U.S. economy is yet to feel the sharp effects from the scaled-down federal government. Economist Mark Zanni, he's at Moody's Analytics in outside of Philadelphia, says the impact could be significant if the shutdown drags on. If it extends into the spring, which is a few more months, it'll start to do real damage and have a real impact because it probably signifies other things are going off the rail in Washington. Washington running amok, period. It's difficult to know how that disruption might play out. Take the housing market, for example. The IRS, of course, the IRS is without workers, isn't open, and verifying tax returns, W-2s, may mean that we might not get homes closings. He said the housing market could be severely disrupted, and particularly during the spring selling season, one of the biggest seasons for houses. The shutdown affects workers up and down the pay scale, in addition to approximately 800,000, that's almost it's 200,000 short of a million, who are either furloughed or facing the prospects of working without pay. Low-wage workers such as cafeteria workers, custodian staffs, work for these private contractors. Unlike federal workers, have little hope of getting back pay when the shutdown ends. Pablo Rosario, he's 49, he works full-time at the Smithsonian Institute of Museum of the American Indian, but the museum hasn't been open since New Year's. His employer, Restaurants Associate, is a contractor that manages cafeterias at the Smithsonian. It's really sad because most of the cooks that they have only one job. I'm lucky because I have a second job, Lazario said, who works the evening shift at a grill district at Reagan National Airport, who is married with 2 daughters. His family has cut back on expenses a month ago, buying less expensive Christmas gifts. His oldest daughter got a used iPhone for Christmas. It cost $100. It isn't connected yet, but there is no line that I can't afford it right now, but she's happy. the partial shutdown. Oops, let me get past this. The partial shutdown is also affected. Oh, we got that. The has begun on the 22nd. That was a holiday present from the DJ Trump outfit, and has been really been a sequence of the shutdown. The early repercussions were muted by the holidays and the ability of some institutions, national parks, and agencies to remain at least partially operational. Volunteers were in there. The state of New York was paying for the Statue of Liberty. The National Gallery of Arts in Washington, it's closed Thursday, a day after a similar move by the Smithsonian institutions. Many museums and the National Zoo is also closed. It's really only yesterday and today that things are getting out of the holiday mode and into serious business. That is from David Berure, President and Chief Executive of Professional Services Council, who represents 400 firms that contract with the federal government. For many agencies affected by the shutdown, their flexibility has been used up, and now they're having to start issuing more stop work orders with no predictable end in sight. Contracts including security guards, suppliers, researchers form a vast shadow of government, must abide by the regulations about whether and how to continue operations. Byzantine regulations. And during funding shortfalls, the contractors have expanded in size and power in recent decades in a push by small government conservatives. And this is a problem with this whole small government model to outsource. 4 out of every 10 people who work for the federal government are private sector workers. That's according to research by Paul Light. He's a professor at New York University. The federal government spends $300 billion a year just on contracts for services. Bunir said the shutdown is hard in 2 ways. One, the uncertainty of how long it's going to last, and when it ends. The other is the ambiguity because it is partial. It's not a full government shutdown. The insufficient communications from the government to companies over what to plan for them. Unlike federal civil servants, private sector workers have limited expectations of receiving back pay from Congress. The Democrats in the Congress should immediately move on this to get back pay. David Hylands, a contractor who's 45 years old, handles fraud analysis in the Boston office of the Securities and Exchange Commission, earns only $50,000 a year. I wouldn't say that I live paycheck to paycheck, but missing one can really hurt. Federal contractors often work side by side with regular civil servants, the same as they do in private industry. The showdown will affect scientific research across the country, something the American nation cannot afford. Major conventions are scheduled for the coming months, such as one by the American Meteorological Association. The American Astrological Association will be disrupted by the absence of government scientists who are not allowed to travel or perform any work. And Jefferson, an associate professor of geology at Kent State University, teaches a watershed hydrology class, that requires students to use the data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's website over the course of the semester. But when students go to the site to do their work, data no longer pops up. Jefferson said university professors who use such federal data deemed to be non-essential under the rules of the shutdown may soon have to restructure their coursework if the shutdown continues. Jefferson says the graduate students will have to rethink their research projects or risk missing deadlines. Jefferson is facing a 31 January deadline for research projects she's required to write with a furloughed government scientist. I can't talk to her, Jefferson said. We Do we continue to work on the proposal without her? Do we throw in the towel? Well, that's a big question there. And move back a year, we lose out, and science loses out. Florida-based Food and Drug Administration consultant Daniel D-A-M-M, anyway, said he's no longer submits applications for new medical devices while the government is closed. A diagnostic X-ray machine and accessory for the defibrillator are amongst the devices that are on hold. I'm afraid there will be a backlog when we reopen. That always does happen. Noted that he was able to pay annual registration fees to the FDA for several foreign companies so they could continue to sell the FDA-approved devices. However, it's still technically legal for them to do so because no one at the FDA has processed their 2019 registrations. The funny thing is they accepted my money, but they aren't providing the service. David Fernstein, 26, who leads tours around Independence Mall in Philadelphia, said business has suffered and visitors have complained about closed facilities. Normally in January and February, people can enter in Independence Hall, but the building is closed, he said, and they can't get up close to Liberty Bell. They can only visit through the windows, in other words, a little window shopping there. Visitors from Australia and New Zealand recently said they were disappointed with the closures. One offered a rather harsh observance, saying your country broke off because of a minor tax agreement, and now your government is closed because of a minor wall disagreement. This was by Kimberly Kindly and Lisa Reen and Joel Archbach. Anyway, this is in the Washington Post. So it kind of tells you the consequences of this quote-unquote shutdown. It boomerangs by the day. Not only does it boomerang by the day, it's a situation where the actual damage is not fully realized or analyzed until it's actually over. And if it goes on through the month of January, that is timed down, workers will lose money, and many of those workers will have to get part-time jobs. And some of the workers that have skills that are in demand, unless they have obviously been with the company very long, will find work elsewhere. And the work that they were doing will be hard to replicate because finding other workers, unless there's obviously a worker that doesn't care, want to get 2 weeks, 30 days, 60 days in, will take such a contract. So that all provides for inefficiencies within the federal government. So in other words, money that quote-unquote is saved by outside workers, it will not occur. In our opinion, the federal government should revisit all of those jobs and transfer over many of those. They started to do some of that, and some of that in some states, transferring over some of the contracted out jobs to regular state and local workers. The problem sometimes arises is the projects themselves are very, very complicated, and if a private contract has been working on, for example, the federal, the federal and state Obamacare site, they had contracted with people like Oracle, etc., that didn't know a damn thing about what they were doing, and it caused all kinds of problems. Oregon had that, and eventually they got it fixed, but it was a PR nightmare. But after the first year, things rolled along. What has happened this year was a lack of promotion. Basically, you put it at that. So the numbers were down a little bit. Now, this is one of the things the new Democratic Congress has to immediately work on and pass legislation, and they have to offer that legislation as a simplified policy statement so ordinary people across the American nation understand precisely what they want to accomplish, and then put it squarely in the Senate and at the desk of DJ Trump. And no doubt it will become another issue in 2020, as many other issues are. Today marked the day that Nancy Pelosi reappeared. She is the first speaker to reappear after being vanished from the speaker's chair. Sam Rayburn was the other speaker a long time ago that happened. But she is back. She does have the gavel, and they're moving on. Our friend out of South Central Los Angeles, Maxine Waters, is back. Hopefully we'll have a picture of Maxine Waters sitting there. She's back with her House subcommittee, very, very important subcommittee there for Maxine. So as they say, the plot is starting to thicken, and then the subject of national news coverage is there. We'll go now to a segment on Bernie Sanders and to a certain extent on Elizabeth Warren. They're being attacked by the monopoly corporate media. In the case of Bernie, CNN, and you'll get to understand what's going on here, because Bernie is the presumed leader in the state of Iowa, and it's all about that. They've done things like that before, and we need to get to a different one here. And we will get here. We'll come back to what's happened in the state of Maine. And this is, we'll just get it while we're here. This is from the Boston Globe. Mills moves ahead with Medicaid expansion on the first day. Mills has been elected in Jeanette Mills, the first executive order. This is from Augustus, Maine. A Democrat ordered her administration to swiftly roll out a Medicaid expansion to at least 70,000 low-income people in the state of Maine. The maniac that used to run the state of Maine, LePage, is finally gone. Fortunately, Mills ordered Maine's healthcare agencies to adopt regulation to allow Mainers to enroll in the Medicaid expansion, saying she is seeking expedited approval of benefits retroactive to July the 2nd. Maine's order also directs the department to work with lawmakers to provide sustainable funds for Maine's expansion. The expansion needs approval of the federal government, and she sent a letter on to the federal government. Period. And there's other little local stuff here. This is in the Globe. Supporters defend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dancing at BU. I'm not sure what that is. The League of People Online came to the newly inaugurated Congress type defense after a small contingent of internet dwellers tried to use it to discredit her. And see if we can get this out of the Globe. I'm not certain if we can. I said I've enjoyed my free articles. Anyway, it doesn't matter here. This is on to the Bernie Sanders hunt here. This is typically how they start these quote-unquote political rumor mills. Now, we haven't decided which Democrat is behind this, but this is in the New York Times. Sexism claims from Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign run, paid less and treated worse. These are some women that have alleged that. We at this mic are always very suspicious of these situations. This is by Sydney Ember and Katie Benner. In February of 2016, Juliana DeLumer, Latino outreach strategist for the Bernie Sanders campaign, presidential operation, complained to her supervisor that she'd been harassed by a campaign surrogate whom she drove to an event ahead of the Democratic primary. This is in the state of Nevada. She said the surrogate told her She had beautiful curly hair and asked if he could touch it. DeLaro said in the interview, thinking that he had just touched the strand. She consented, but she said that he ran his hand through her hair in a sexual way and continued to grab and touch her and push my boundaries for the rest of the day. I just wanted to be done with it so badly, she said. When she reported the incident to Bill Vesquez, a manager of the Latino outreach team, he told her, I bet you would like it if you were younger. And according to her account, another woman who witnessed the exchange, and then he laughed. The account, like Mrs. DeLaro, describes the episodes of sexual harassment and demeaning treatment, as well as pay discrepancy in Bernie's 2016 campaign, have circulated in recent weeks in emails and, of course, online comments. Now, as the Vermont senator tries to rebuild support for a second run, notice how the Times built that tries to build. He's already built it. He's been working on that for the last 4 years. At the White House, his perceived failures to address this issue have damaged his progressive bona fides. Delegates and nearly a dozen former state and national staffers have said in an interview over the last month. And it raises questions among those who, whether he can adequately fight for the interests of women and who increasingly defies the Democratic Party in the Trump era. If he runs again, that's if he runs again in 2020, they're trying to force him out. The former staffer said complaints about mistreatment and pay disparities during and just after the campaign reached some senior leaders of the operation. In an interview on a Wednesday over CNN, Sanders said he was proud of his 2016 campaign, attributing any missteps with staff to the explosion. He did have an explosion. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we did everything right in terms of human resources. I certainly apologize to any woman, and this is where he made a mistake right here, who felt she was not treated appropriately. What he should have said, I sincerely apologize to the women who were not treated appropriately, and of course, if I run, we'll do a better job next time. Well, wording is very, very important here, and what happens is Bernie's he's 78 years old. He is a product, like DJ Trump, who is only, 72, of a time when this would perhaps not matter, particularly in private industry where DJ Trump was. And it's like a water on the proverbial duck's back with DJ Trump anyway. Asked if he knew about the complaints, he said, I saw a little, but busy running around the country trying to make the case. And he was. Some women said the fledgling campaign was disorganized and decentralized, which many campaigns are these days, which made it hard to know whom to turn to in case of mistreatment. I remember when we were trying to get press credentials, we weren't able to get them because there was nobody that had given to us. I did experience sexual harassment during the campaign, and there was no one who would could help us. Samantha Davis, the former director of operations in Texas and New York, who also worked on the campaign's advance team, she said that her supervisors marginalized her after she declined an invitation to a hotel room. Well, she was very wise to do that. Interview women told of makeshift living accommodations on the road where they were asked to sleep in rooms along with male co-workers they didn't know. Women who had access to salary records were taken aback to learn that some female staffers made thousands of dollars less than their male counterparts. That also happened in the Hillary the Monster Clinton's campaign. Two delegates who supported Sanders 2 years ago recently told his staff that he couldn't run for president again without addressing the sexism they believe surfaced in the last campaign. This was an entire wave of rotten sexual harassment that seemingly was never dealt with. That's one of the delegates wrote on an email. obtained by the New York Times. Jeff Weaver, he was a campaign manager and currently a top advisor, said in an email that anyone who committed sexual harassment on the campaign would not be asked back. They're not only not going to be asked back, they will not be back. And he regrets the campaign's shortcomings. Now, this is what should have been said. It was too male, yes. It was too white, yes. And sometimes this would be a priority to remedy on any future campaign. Definitely, we share the deep concerns. Now, this is the same thing happened with Hillary the Monster Clinton's campaign. If you read Ms. Bazille's book, Friends of Bernie, the campaign committee, said in a response to questions from the Times that there were a number of actions taken during the 2016 regarding harassment and sexism, including employee counseling and a campaign-wide review to standardize pay. Now, that has long been an issue, not only in political campaigns, but consulting firms that are there, in terms of various other people in private industry. The old glass ceiling effect is there, and it would very much be in this type of campaign, because the campaigns, although the number of political consultants, the number of companies have changed, the way that they do things basically have not changed. So in other words, when Karl Rove was running campaigns in the 70s and the 80s, the structures have changed, the number of consultants have changed, but some of the old perceived situations have not. And that happened with Hillary the Monster Clinton, the male types that ran her campaign shut out the women. Period. And of course, eventually that shut down her campaign. Circumstances have changed since then. Mr. Sanders is no longer an outsider. Now, this is the whole issue here. He's an established leader who they would like to dethrone and must grapple with Me Too. And Me Too is what brought Al Franken down also. Campaigns can be grueling experiences for both men and women, no doubt about this. A young lady that I mentored was in the campaign. She went from Iowa to Texas, campaigned very hard there, and ended up in New York State, and she worked very, very hard. But when other people were out there sizing up jobs in the Obama administration, she was left out of the fanfare. Fortunately for her, she took her experience, her gun permit that she got in Texas, dealing with the rednecks there, and took it and went on to graduate school, and we're proud to report now she has a PhD work experience and she's gainfully employed. Oops, sorry about that. Political campaign, let me move past that. Bernie 2020, back to Ms. DeLauro, the former strategist in Nevada, who was empathetic about, in her own Facebook post. I have to speak up about this now because I hope it will be of service to the next Sanders campaign. She wrote that on December the 7th. In the interview with the Times, DeLauro said she told several people who were high in the campaign, including Rick Peltier, who served as National Field Director, about her encounters in Nevada with the surrogate, a Mexican game show host named Marco Antonio Regil. But she felt she was not taking it seriously, no doubt about that. Marcia Medina, I suppose, Medina, who was alongside, was on the Latino outreach team, who was also with Ms. DeLauro. When she spoke with Vasquez about the incident, confirmed his comments. Vasquez says he doesn't recall, I imagine he doesn't, making a flippant comment. No doubt, I think he did make it. He said he assigned 2 women to accompany the surrogate and then checked in with them to make sure there were no problems. Vasquez said he also told his boss, Arturo Camorra, another manager of the Latino outreach team, and a deputy national political director, about what happened to follow up with the memo to Kamana 2 weeks later. Anyway, the Senator's campaign committee, in its response to the Times, said no member of leadership above Pellier was aware of the incident. Well, they're trying to control it. Doesn't work. Some former staff members said there was little pay transparency, and employees were often negotiating their own salaries. Presses that tend to favor men, who often feel more comfortable requesting higher compensation. Davis, the former state director, said that she was originally paid $2,400 a month as a senior staff member, and saw in campaign records that a younger man who originally was supposed to report to her was paid twice as much, $5,000 a month. Let me finish this up here. We put it up on Facebook, incidentally. Some weeks later, Medina, I think that's how you pronounce that, and other members of the Latino outreach team have shared their concerns about Carmona and Mr. Vasquez during a conference call with Peltier. Medina said the Times has reviewed emails scheduling the call, and another staff member who participated confirmed the substance. This is what happens to you these days. There's many eyes and many emails. Carmona was promoted out of Latino outreach group during the campaign and named a national deputy political director. Oh boy. All sexual harassment, these issues of discrimination should be taken seriously and investigated fairly. That's what Carmona said in an email. He lied. So this is, the only thing we can say is that this is coming out early in the campaign. And you want it to come out, and coming from the CNN people and what they were up to. And let me just say no thanks here. I think we might. Bernie Sanders has a problem. This is by Chris Chilizer. Used to be the Washington Post. Bernie Sanders is almost certain. I mean, to be honest, with each of it running for president in 2020. Lots of people think he is a top contender, no doubt about that. There's old Joe Biden, who's the same age as Bernie, 78. I am not really one of them. Of course, R put a fine point on it. I don't think Sanders' 2016 campaign, in which he quietly overachieved, is indicative of how he will fare in 20. Well, he hopes so. Here's one example. On Wednesday night, Sanders was asked by Allison Cooper whether he was aware during the campaign of the allegations published. We just read to you. I was a little bit, but I was busy running around, no doubt about that. It's not a good answer at all, and especially not hearing the ongoing impact of the Me Too movement. Worth noting, he did apologize to any woman who felt. We talked about that. If I run, I'll do better next time. He shouldn't say any woman, but felt. Large point here is that Sanders got away with a lot of goofs, like the one doing. And you notice what he's doing here. The course of the 2012 campaign against Hillary Monster Clinton, that no one believed, particularly in the early days of the race, that he had any real chance. Sanders had spent decades in the House and the Senate, and Clinton barely mentioned the thousands of votes he took. She did spend time on his votes in support of gun rights, largely because she was afraid of pissing off liberals who were already skeptical of her. Well, that would be the case even if I meant it. Sanders ran for president at this time. He wouldn't be an outsider charging at the windmill. He would be one of the better known candidates. He may be one of the better known candidates. H and I were talking about that. how Bernie Sanders presents himself. We were talking about the issue of a Jewish candidate. Well, everybody knows Bernie Sanders is Jewish, and everybody knows he's a social democrat or a socialist that happens to be Jewish. That was brought out in the campaign by the Hillary Monster Clinton campaign. The point we're trying to make here that these early disparaging remarks and so-called discoveries have been around now for 3 years. They're brought up for a purpose. And CNN and company have thrown in there with the New York Times. They're trying to define what will happen in Iowa. That's all it's about. Because Bernie will run very good in Iowa. It's his type of place. And when you have Bernie there, you have Elizabeth Warren coming. She's also been disparaged by even our newspaper, the Boston Globe. Anyway, these things are done deliberately. And we'll see what will happen to Beto O'Rourke. They'll be talking about Beto leaving the scene of an accident. All these little trivial things, and DJ Trump has proven this, don't really matter. What matters is persuading enough of the voters that you have a program with their best interests at heart. And Bernie Sanders does that. Beto O'Rourke does that. And to a certain extent, Elizabeth Warren. Now, Elizabeth Warren has labored with her consumer protection. There's no doubt about that. She's walked the walk, carried a ton of water out there. But if they can eliminate these progressive candidates from the fray, then they can bring on characters like in the hands of the corporate people, Tweety King Booker, the former mayor of the urban ghetto at the time he was there. Now it's not an urban ghetto of Newark, New Jersey, and now supposedly the senator from New Jersey, because he literally did not have the intestinal fortitude to run against Two-Ton Christie on a re-election situation there in Jersey. And then you got a bunch of other wannabes that are coming in there. That charge has even been leveled against Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris needs to prove herself. And then you got a long list of so-called establishment candidates. But yes, Joe Lunchbox Biden has been around since the 70s, riding trains from Washington back to Delaware, to Philadelphia, and on to Delaware. I read that same train. Anyway, he's been around. He's seen by the establishment. He's a known name that they know they can deal with. There's nothing against Joe Lunchbox Biden, but at the same time, we'll see how they treat him as opposed. In other words, they're trying to literally seed out the candidates, particularly from the progressive wing, before the election ever starts. So far, Elizabeth Warren has thrown her hat in the ring. The other candidates will get in the ring pretty quickly, no doubt about it, particularly some that the ticket out of Iowa is their ticket towards the presidency. And I'm thinking here of Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. She'll be following the same playbook that Jesse Jackson out of Chicago, because of the radio station in Chicago broadcasted to Iowa, as he called it, Iowa. Anyway, so that set Jesse up as an early favorite in Iowa. People knew who Jesse was. Same thing with Barack Obama out of the city of Chicago. He was able to go into Iowa with the help of a lot of people, and a lot of those people actually came from Minnesota. We saw them there. So those people will be there, and they'll be there from other states. But they set Iowa up. Well, what's next? You got to go to New Hampshire. That's New England. So you going into New England, Bernie is a favorite. He's from Vermont, right next door. And Liz Warren from Boston, the same situation. So they understand the cycle. And then they go down, maybe stop in Nevada. Then South Carolina, you got Super Tuesday, where you got a gamut of states on Super Tuesday race, including now California, where Kamala Harris is a person to beat. That's what this is all about. Because they know if Bernie can make it to California, he'll make it all the way to the Democratic Convention. He should make it there anyway if he gets in this campaign. He will be one of the 4 tickets out of Iowa unless they completely sabotage his campaign. We see that shaping up. The same thing with Klobuchar. She wants to be one of the 4 out of Iowa. And we don't know where Liz Warren will be at this point in time. It just depends if she can raise the money. Now, some people will be able to raise the money for Iowa and go on into New Hampshire. But as they go into South Carolina, it depends on where the money is flowing there. Beto O'Rourke would be able to raise the money, no doubt about that. Where he lands there, we don't know. So in other words, there's a number of things up in the air so far as to where we go. Out of Slate Magazine, we're going to spend time in the Open Source Report talking about this. Watergate was the world's first hashtag, the Forgetting Computer System, named Plato gave its first digital public forum, and the first time a president, Tricky Dick, to shut it down. Contrary to what Silicon Valley would like you to believe, the rise of social computing, using computers to connect people and enable them to interact, collaborate, and communicate, not only happened long before the personal computer there, but Plato Computer System was launched in 1960 at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It was designed to be a platform for online learning, and by the early 70s it had evolved into something much more. Thanks to the growing enthusiasm user community, many of whom were high school and college students within one 12-month stretch. That's between 1973, I remember Plato, and 1974, create online message forums there, and they were able to communicate. We'll have more on this later in the game. Now let us head back to the other station here, and let me check our time very quickly here. We're running a little bit late. We wanted to have Professor Rice out of Berkeley, but we'll have to get him tomorrow night. We'll pause here, WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network, and come back with this. We return. It was interesting from Bill Walton, for those that remember him. He was at Oregon. He's been and is of course his son. I forget his son's first name now, but nonetheless, Bill Walton was a player, famous player, basketball player later. Let's see, did he play for the Lakers? Perhaps he did. Anyway, he suggested that former President Barack Obama be the coach at UCLA. Anyway, kind of interesting. Little side note there. Let's do the basketball scores here. The Raptors were at the Spurs in San Antonio. San Antonio 125 to 105. The Nuggets were at the Kings. It was the Nuggets 117 to 113. And in overtime, the Rockets and Warriors. The Rockets by 1 point, 135 to 134. It took us a little while to find this stuff, but we finally found it. And for the NHL, the Wild 4-3 over the Maple Leafs, and the Flames and the Bruins in Boston. It was the Bruins 6-4 with the final there. The Panthers and the Sabres. It was the Sabres 4-3. The Hurricanes and the Flyers. It was the Hurricanes 5-3 over the Flyers. The Blackhawks of Chicago, the Islanders. It was the Islanders 3-2 in overtime. The Canucks and Canadians. The Canadians shut out the Canucks 2-0. The Capitals and Blues in St. Louis. It was the Blues. Let me just make sure I'm doing this right here. Yeah, 5-2. And the Lightning and Kings. It was the Lightning 6-2 there. And a little story here on the Cubs. The Cubs have enough to keep up in baseball's tightest division. They're in that division with Milwaukee and several others. That hole faded. Milwaukee overtook Chicago in the NFL Central. Remember that. You got St. Louis and Cincinnati also there. They've got strong teams. And the fourth place team in the NL Central, the Pittsburgh Pirates, finished with the best record in the division. That was 43-33. I've been saying it all along last year, according to Joe Madden. I think we have the best division in baseball. I really do, team for team. And playing the Cardinals is no fun again, no doubt about that. And the Cardinals, that is, they have Paul Goldschmidt from Arizona before they signed reliever Andrew Miller. Also, before the Reds traded for Mr. Pugh. Yasiel Pugh, Matt Kemp. Remember Matt Kemp and Alex would. Meanwhile, the Cubs have not made significant upgrades to their lineup there, though they were able to keep Cole Hamel around, but so what? And we've already known we'd be missing the closer, Brandon Morrow. Oh, boy. So, I mean, there's a lot of changes there to the Cubs. The Cubs trying to hold on. Miller's signing helped the Cards overcome the time and money they put into lefty Brian Cecil, who had been terrible since signing his $30.5 million deal in 2017. So that's some of the things going on here with the Cards and Cubs. We'll have more of this on All About Sports. Right now, Brewer, our Cub fan will be yelling something like "rest on your laurels," or it wouldn't be wrong. The Cubs need a left-hand reliever like Miller. They need more left-hand reliever, in my opinion. So we'll see, where that goes. It's around the time last year that the team got serious about the pitcher, Mr. Darvish, after being left out of the bidding. Signing Harper would be a crown jewel in the of the winter for the Cubs, but then again, the same was about Darvish. This season he was forgotten as Cecil with the he didn't have a very good season. As Cecil with the Cardinals, then Mr. Cecil, or Cecil, whatever you want to call it. So the Cubs will go on. Joe Madden filled out his staff, hired. This man here. Trade for Corey Kniever here. Let's see. Dallas Keuchel could find himself a significant advantage. Most of it there. Keuchel, who turned 31, is not without warts. Anyway, he's with the Astros. I guess he's still with the Astros. I'd not read the strip prior to this, so it's kind of somewhere here we had Joe Madden filling out his staff. Also hired former pitching coach Bob Tewksbury, as the team's mental skills coordinator. Tewksbury served a similar role with San Francisco Giants the past 2 seasons. So they now him work for the Boston Red Sox. Let's see what we got here. Theo Epstein, what did they do here? Loretta, 47, spent part of last year in the front office of the Padres. He'll be the bench coach for him. I don't know anything about him. Cubs have hired, the infielder, Mark Latrella, as a bench coach there, and replacing Brendan Hyde, who was hired as the manager of the Baltimore Orioles. Anyway, so it gets strange. We'll see you tomorrow morning on the week that was. We'll have Uncle Carl's latest musings. I assume he'll be working out of the Wall Street Journal. And perhaps if we have time, we'll have something from Newt Gingrich. The shutout continues in Washington. The assault, new assault by the capitalist media, corporate media, on Bernie Sanders. And it started with Elizabeth Warren. We'll be monitoring that very, very closely. We're a year out of Iowa right now, but it's already started. And progressives, as one would say, have to keep their eye on the prize and deal with it. Bernie Sanders needs a better management. You don't make statements like those that feel offended. Now, that's the same basic situation that came out of the hearings of the Supreme Court justice there. His hearing, they issued sort of a cursed statement like that, but he got away with it. Now, this is something very important to remember. The Trump administration has been all over the place with Me Too. Trump has been in the center of Me Too, but from the polling I've looked at a hell of a lot of polling, it has not hurt him. Now, in the midterm, when women came out in great numbers, it hurt some candidates in some races, localized races, congressional races. But as far as senatorial candidates in these very red states, it did not hurt them, and it has not hurt Trump very much in his national polling. He's still in the low 40s, and he's remained in the low 40s. So this has to be understood. Many of the people that voted for Barack Obama and then voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries ended up voting for DJ Trump in the election. That is the prize to keep your eye on before you get off into various other things. And in the Congress, they have a pay-as-you-go. I mean, how much more reactionary you can be. So there's a lot of attention on that. We'll have more of that. Abigail Spanberg and some of the others that voted against Nancy Pelosi, and where Nancy Pelosi is, and her lieutenants who are all in their 70s like her. That is not a big deal in itself, because many times people that are of an older generation are much more progressive than a younger generation. But it's a good learning or training school for any of the rookies to be associated with the older team. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning. We will also have a Numbers Man, it's a macroeconomics program this weekend, and an open source report, and also all about sports. Good day, and have a good weekend.